Welcome, everybody. How's it going? Good evening. Starting a little bit of a late show and doing a little bit different, doing some different stuff today. Going to be getting into um, a video I don't think I've actually reviewed anything on this, but Fire Ministries is a YouTube channel out of Australia. A guy named Matt. I think his last name's Mason. Matt Mason. Anyway, Matt is quite dedicated to um, his online ministry. He also has another YouTube channel devoted to health stuff. And I was introduced to this from a friend, a YouTube user, Nikola, and I can't remember which first one it was that I watched, but he tends to traffic in a lot of, the sort of usual kind of quick evangelical. Um, I don't even want to call it like epistemology, more like just sort of the sort of basic apologetics. I think a lot of evangelical Christians end up hearing about or gravitating towards. So anyway, just going to say hi to everybody in the chat. Let's see here. God equals the square root of -1. Cerberus X, Michael Deaton, Cascade, welcome. Chad K, Rat Snake, AJ if I missed you, Algorithm, Jim Cummins, nice to see you. Let's see, Pipeline Audio, Gord Lord, Steve Wilk, good to see you all. Michael Deaton, Messing Around, Alex Baptista, Shapeshifting Monkey, Death Hand. Yeah, welcome. Thanks for joining me live. I know I think there's quite a few things going on live. It seems like every time I go live now there's maybe I'm just subscribed to too many channels. I don't know. But anyway, I saw this one earlier today while I was working, and it kind of caught my attention just because of the rapid fire nature of a lot of the arguments that were kind of coming out of this. And it really the part that really kind of caught me is within like the first 5 minutes, and I think you'll see why. Sir, I came back to the word Mason. What did I miss? Nothing. I'm just rambling about what I'm going to be covering here. I mean, as you can see from the beginning here, the freeze frame. I need to point that way. I'm not used to that. Um, I mean, Richard Dawkins is like, featured prominently in this because, atheism is sprang, complete from Richard Dawkins' mind and mouth. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of straw men in this one. There's going to be a lot of weird things. He gets into, this is a 15-minute video, and towards the middle I probably won't cover too much of it. I don't really have too much to say because it's a lot of just parading through a lot of kind of tired assertions that I shouldn't say a lot of Christians specifically, it's a lot of evangelical Protestants make when attempting to defend a kind of young earth style evangelical Christianity that they go for. And I believe this guy is a young earther. So for anybody in the audience, let me know if my volume is too low or if the playback on the audio is bad. Yell at me real quick. I'm just checking things now. Atheist priest Dawkins. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if anybody knows this, but Richard Dawkins is essentially, it was Hitchens was the pope of atheists, but now I think it's Richard Dawkins, unless he's been canceled or something. Now, who knows who it is, but Matt Dillahunty? I don't know, but it always seems to shift, depends on which group of Christians make a villain out of whomever. So anyway, this one here is a really quick one. I'm going to read the description real quick. Atheism is a religion for those who don't understand science. Atheists always claim to believe in science, but did you know that atheism is a position which is held because one lacks a proper understanding of science? I didn't know that. The truth is that atheists don't understand science, and their position is, by definition, unscientific. By definition, you say. Atheism is unscientific, foolish, and irrational. Go on. On the other hand, theism, the belief in a personal God, is scientific, logical, and rational. Holding to atheism means that one has to deny the science available and hold to a blind faith. Holding to atheism means that one has to deny, but okay. Many will say that things like evolution is a fact, are facts, but this couldn't be further from the truth. I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. Atheism is a fairy tale. Atheism is silly. In this video, a Christian will debunk atheism. Okay. Well, I'll leave that for you guys to decide. I will also, because I'm an opinionated jerk, will also weigh in on that claim. So here we go. We're going to play this. Yell at me again if volume issues start popping up. So it would help if I turned up the volume. Here we go.
Atheists would try to use a clever trick in an attempt to avoid the burden of proof. Atheists will say, well, I'm not saying that there is no God, but what I'm saying is I simply lack belief in a God. I haven't been given sufficient evidence yet, so I'm withholding belief. What they do is then they set up their own personal subjective standard of evidence, and they're able to deny any evidence that doesn't meet that personal standard, even if it's not objectively reasonable. And
Okay, so there's kind of the first claim right there about holding up a different standard of evidence. I don't know that he actually gets anywhere with that or really does anything with that. But that seems odd to me that, like, okay, it would be one thing if you wanted to make the claim that, well, here's the problem, and like per his description, well, atheists just aren't paying attention to the evidence. But here in the video, he's saying no, what atheists are actually doing is inventing a subjective standard, a sort of idiosyncratic standard for evidence, and then when objective actual evidence doesn't meet, whatever these sort of shifted goalpost, qualifications are for evidence, then of course they just reject it. That's a hell of a claim. So I don't know exactly what he means by this, other than to say, the evidence that we have for God should just suffice. But the only reason that you're rejecting it is because you've concocted some standards of evidence that don't apply. All right. Doesn't really do anything with that. And there's not too much more to do with that, but here's where he starts to kind of cripple himself real quick with this next part. And just in case anybody's wondering, this guy reminds me, I think the name is pronounced Fugit, F-U-G-I-T, Patrick Fugit. He was in that show at the Exorcist, no, Outcast. I think it was a Starz show. Pretty good show, horror series. But he was also in Almost Famous. Good actor. This guy reminds me of him. Only Australian.
And then when you ask them about their position, what they would generally say is that there is no burden of proof on me because I'm not making any claim. You're the one making the claim that God exists. I'm not saying God doesn't exist. I'm just saying I don't have enough evidence, so you're the one who has to provide me with the evidence. But the reality is that if they are saying that they are withholding belief in God because they don't have enough evidence for the existence of God, then what they are implicitly saying is that it is at least possible for a universe to exist without God. And that itself is a claim which they have to support with evidence, whether they like it or not.
Whether they like it or not. Okay, so this is a common one. I think Turek does this. I think that's where Matt Mason here is getting this from. I mean, almost everybody runs with this. Jay Robin, Darth Dawkins, I think even Tone runs with this kind of stuff. This is that weird kind of claim that, and this is his house. This is a nice house. I like that window back there. Anyway, I'm getting distracted. Looks like he's got a good kitchen back there. Here's my problem with this. So the claim is, well, here's the problem. If you entertain the possibility, they're entertaining the possibility of a reality that doesn't require a God. Right. Because they're not convinced of the reality that you're describing, so they're basically holding up both of them and saying, well, maybe either possibility is in the running. He seems to be saying, okay, well, here's what you have to do. If you're going to say that there's a possibility that my God-based worldview and reality is wrong, you need to conclusively prove that this other possibility is necessary, right? Like that seems like a weird thing. If two people are sitting there in a conversation, and the conversation is essentially dealing with, why is there something rather than nothing, which is sort of what he's implying here, and the person is not convinced that a God is responsible for creating any of that, and this person's like, aha, but by saying that, what you're really saying is that another reality without a supernatural creator is possible. That person would be like, well, yeah, but I'm not convinced one way or the other. And there's certain different kinds of evidence. There's evidence for and against, I think, maybe both sides. What Matt seems to be doing here is saying, well, here's the problem, that now you have to argue. Because you're entertaining that position, you're now wrapped into that position, and you have to be able to explain it, because now that's exactly where that's what you have to defend. But they haven't committed to that. That might be entailed from their position if they're more convinced of that rather than a God worldview. But I don't see how you get to this other shift that he's done. Also, there's a part that he seems to have missed. And anyone please correct me if they think I'm going off in a weird direction with this. It seems to me that if that's the position that he wants to go in, then he's actually put himself in a much more difficult position too, because now he has to essentially make the argument that this reality is impossible without God. How? So he should be able to explain. Now, he can give us the why, right? He just believes, well, we have something rather than nothing, and it must be because of a God. But can he really explain that conclusively, right? It's not just that, no, that God's the best explanation for all the stuff that we see and experience. Some of the stuff that we see and experience. It is absolutely necessary. And the counter to that, a reality where there is no supernatural creator being, would be impossible. That's a hell of a position. So trying to do this little switch and say, you as an agnostic aren't really a thing, what you've actually committed to implicitly is a position of hard atheism. Okay, so now I shifted it back to you. It can just be turned right back onto them. Okay, so what you're saying is that that position isn't a possibility because it is, according to you, by definition, impossible. Okay, then what's the explanation for that, right? And if the only explanation is, I suspect, coming from Matt, all evidence is evidence for God, it's not really falsifiable. So, and let me take a look here real quick. Yep, Orge says, I'm fine with both sides having a burden of proof. Yeah, so am I. My issue with this, though, is that how quickly that burden of proof thing pops up. This idea that, so when he brings up the issue of, well, this is a trick that atheists do because they don't want to have to deal with their burden of proof because that's their claim. If you're dealing with an atheist, right, then maybe that's, that I think that's fair. But if you're dealing with somebody like you went on to explain, well, what they're trying to tell you is that they just don't have evidence for a God. They're not convinced. The evidence that they've seen doesn't convince them that they're not convinced, so therefore they have no belief in God. That's slightly different. Now, if he wants to go further, Matt kind of strikes me based on some of the stuff that he's attracted to here, the rhetoric that's already getting employed, that he wants to dismiss that because that's just a rhetorical tactic. It's not that they're convinced that there isn't one. We don't want there to be one because we want to sin, and therefore we're coming up with these irrational positions to justify a not God world. That would be my guess. But we'll let him talk a little bit more. We'll get through this here. Jody, because it was in big bold letters on the screen, what he said has to be true. Yeah, that's always a great visual technique. Orge continues, as long as conversation can happen. Yeah, again, I don't have a problem with that burden of proof thing, but I think what he's done here is kind of illustrate just how kind of perverse that whole position has gotten, where it's like, aha, well, here's the thing. If you're going to take an agnostic position, what you don't understand is that implicitly it entails a commitment to this position that you have to demonstrate without a doubt. Okay, but the flip side of that is the Christian should be able to demonstrate why a world without a God is necessarily impossible, and they have not been able to demonstrate that. So why is their burden of proof decreased because an agnostic has said, well, the evidence isn't convincing me, right? And if they just shift gears and say, well, you know what, it's not that, it's your motivations, it's your emotional inclinations towards sin and your desire for there not to be a God. You're just in denial about that. You know there's a God just as much as I do. You just want to keep sinning. If they get into that mode, I think anyone that does that, I think he might maybe get into this a little bit towards the end here. If they've done that, they've derailed the first part. There was no point in them talking about a rational position or a burden of proof, right? Because why is there a burden of proof? That this person is lying to you. They know that there's a God. They just don't want to admit to it. Stick to your guns, guys. Don't be sleazy. So I don't have evidence is what a theist should debate a lack theist on. Let's see. Otangelo, debunking atheism. Even a 10-year-old has an easy job. Well, it turns out that a lot of this stuff is prepared so even a 10-year-old can do it. I don't think it's particularly convincing to anyone. So, and I don't know if arguments like this really work. Although there's somebody in the comments actually says, hey, this actually worked for me. I looked at these arguments and that got me from atheist to agnostic, and then I kept plunging forward, and then eventually accepted Christ. And you know what? Maybe. Um, hey, welcome, Jason Torn. Nice to see you here. Let's see.
But then they'll say, no, a purely materialistic universe is the default position. But that itself is a subjective claim which we can just outright reject. So
why? So first of all, I think that's a straw man, because there are atheists that aren't materialists. So he's automatically just kind of lumping all atheists in with somebody who would say the only thing that we have is material, is a materialistic, outlook on things. That's sort of the metaphysic and their take on it. Then what does he do? That's what all atheists would do, and then they put that forward as a subjective thing, and then assert that that is the default position. There are atheists and agnostics who say that atheism or a lack of belief in God is sort of a default position. I'm not really convinced by that, and I don't really think that that's all that effective to say. I think that there are people that are just uninitiated in God claims and wouldn't know one way or the other. Most people who come up in some kind of culture get exposed to religion in one way or another. But see, he's already starting to kind of move into these quick and easy, dismissive kind of straw man explanations and say, oh, well, this is what they're doing. They all just assume this is a default position, that everything's material, and that's just a subjective experience, so we can dismiss that out of hand. Okay, well, without better evidence, you asserting that, and this is what he's going to say next. Let's hear what the alternative is.
There really is only a binary option here. Either a purely materialistic universe is able to exist on its own, or it requires the supernatural, a form of God/creator. So let's look at the scientific evidence.
Okay, so that was 1 and then 0.5. That really wasn't a binary solution. So a binary one would be, it's either a materialistic universe or it isn't, right? And his sort of choice is he's only allowing for 2 options, just 2. We either have a purely materialistic kind of universe, or we have a materialistic universe that is guided, shaped, kick-started, and in whatever those dimensions are, by some kind of supernatural force, a creator, a guiding hand, a combination of the two, whatever. So it's a combo of materialism and supernatural. What I find interesting here is that he doesn't just say it could be supernatural, right? Like, he's presupposing the existence of an actual external physical reality. And by external, I mean external from the mind of the God that he believes in. Couldn't it all just be ideas inside the mind of a supernatural being? So he's already not setting up a great contrast here.
And see which of these 2 positions are best supported. So first of all, we know that the universe has a beginning. Every drop of scientific evidence supports this. We see this
drop of scientific evidence, kind of a strange word.
Second law of thermodynamics, that the universe is running down, and in order for something to run down, it must have started at some point.
I'm not a physicist, but I don't think that is a particularly thoughtful way of describing entropy, but I could be wrong. I don't know many that I think there's probably more useful ways of saying that rather than say running down. That's just sort of, oh, well, everything's just kind of running out of steam. Might be. That sounds like he's maybe appealing to entropy there. I don't know that that's exactly what entropy is, but whatever. The weird thing about this is that he actually mentions the expansion of the universe, and what we do know, physicists have discovered, is that it's not just expanding, but that expansion is accelerating, which seems counterintuitive to what he's talking about. So
we also know that the universe is expanding. The Hubble telescope confirmed this years ago, and it's expanding from a single point, which means that it can be contracted back to a single point. We also see things like radiation echo, temperature ripples, and also Einstein's theory of relativity, that the universe has a beginning and was not eternal like he thought. Einstein disliked the results so much that he added a fudge factor into his theory to allow for an eternal universe. He later admitted his error as the biggest blunder of my life. So
okay, so he's breezing through a lot of really potentially complicated things there, but that last bit about Einstein, what little I know about that, I believe he's talking about Einstein's cosmological constant. And yeah, it was, I don't know if fudge factor is really the right way to do it, but that's what Einstein kind of factored in when Hubble showed the expansion, that the galaxies were actually expanding away from each other. So there is this lore in physics that Einstein kind of acknowledged. That says, I don't know how true that is. But what I thought was interesting about this is that actually, and he doesn't get into this, is that the cosmological constant is now actually aiding physicists in trying to determine the effects of dark energy and how it plays a role in what I mentioned before, not only the expansion, the constant expansion of our universe, but its observed acceleration. And so he's playing real fast and loose with this kind of stuff. It just sounds like, oh, well, here, this guy, even Einstein got it wrong, and that's proof there that the universe had a starting point, and therefore it had a starter. And that starter, why can't that be God? Yeah, yeah, kitchen sink science. Yeah, kind of. But if no offense to Matt here, but if that's, I don't want him working on my sink. That's a terrible joke. The universe isn't running down, it's returning to a point of maximum equilibrium. Yeah, that's probably a more effective way of saying it, but that's not the image that he wants to point to, right? Everything is slowly receding to a point of death, and we need a salvation and a savior. So let's see. Rat Snake, all caps and dramatic music. I'm convinced. You should be. I mean, he really put some time into this, and he edits his videos, damn it. He doesn't just do this lazy live stream and shoot from the hip kind of crap that I do. Oh, man, I'm bad at YouTube. Okay, here we go.
Conclusion, we see that all the scientific evidence points to the fact that the universe had a beginning, just as the Bible states, and the science is consistent with a Genesis account.
Yeah, but the problem is that, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. The only problem is that a lot of the ancient Near Eastern traditions that that kind of inform a lot of what's in Genesis, and there's multiple accounts of Genesis built in there. That's probably something that Matt doesn't want to talk about, but Hebrew Bible scholars do acknowledge that there's different pieces that are formed in there, and some of them borrow from other ancient Near Eastern traditions, and the notion that God poofed all of reality into existence isn't entirely consistent with what they thought, right? There was the whole Tiamat, the Enuma Elish story, which is a sort of primordial chaos, which is kind of Marduk defeating Tiamat, which represents chaos, defeats Tiamat and then sort of crafts this world, this reality out of that chaos. So it was it was something from something. So this idea that, it's like, well, it started with a starter. Okay. If you take that from that position, it sort of sounds like God just started it from nothing. What we'll see here is that Matt is quickly going to get into why atheists are the ones that believe in creatio ex nihilo, and yeah.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. If you believe that something just magically exploded out of nothing, well, give me one scientific piece of evidence where any explosion has caused order and not chaos. You can't, because it's not scientific.
You're right, and it's not scientific to compare the singularity, commonly referred to as the Big Bang, with an explosion. Something that he should know better about, but the reason he's doing this is because this is a common way of kind of misrepresenting the cosmology behind these explanations. That's not an accurate way to do it. And if remember, he's the scientific one. We're the ones that are not scientific, as in we being the atheists. If Matt, you want to convince people, and then you need to be as scientific as possible. Calling the Big Bang an explosion is not a scientific thing to say, and representing it as an explosion that you can't get order from, not cool. That is not cool.
Someone might say, well, something else existed prior to the Big Bang, but this belief isn't based on the science. This is a faith-based philosophical attempt to try to replace the God that was required for the Big Bang to occur. The cosmological argument goes like this. The universe had a beginning. Whatever has a beginning has a cause. So what is the cause? If space, time and matter had a beginning, then what created space, time and matter cannot be made of space, time and matter itself, because that did not exist. So
that's actually not a bad rundown, because I think I've frequently kind of forgotten like what it is. Like, because even William Lane Craig did that. I'm like, well, he created space, time, and matter, but it can't be made out of space, time, and matter. I was always like, well, why the hell not? Like, because it's outside that, right? There was no space, time, and matter, and then there was. So whatever made it can't be made of those things. Like, nifty. So what is God? Well, he's spaceless, timeless, and immaterial, right? He's going to go on here.
Cause must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial.
Yep.
Powerful to be able to create.
Okay.
Intelligent, and also personal to be able to choose to create. Does that sound like anyone you know?
It sounds like the Sorceress of Grayskull to me, but, different strokes for different folks. I think she'd be a cooler god. So, this explanation that he gets like, ooh, does that sound like anyone we know? A personal being who chose to create? Yeah, and chose to create in this way in particular, which is a little bit weird, right? And one would then start to wonder, like, could this God have chosen to create anything differently? Could he have done it better, right? Of course, that's probably something that me as an ignorant heathen should not be doing. Who am I to judge Matt's God? But here we go. He's going to get into this lovely quote here. If you study science deep enough and long enough, it will force you to believe in God. Lord Kelvin. I tried looking up Lord Kelvin quotes, and I couldn't find this one from anything. I'm always suspicious about these things. He could have said this, but I couldn't find any way to corroborate this. So if anybody knows a good place to actually corroborate quotes like this, there were a couple other ones that were more popular, and those ones were not. They were misattributed to him. So I'm not sure if this one is or not. I just these things are always kind of tricky. I just that's always death. And the idea that you do this kind of stuff, like, well, you guys like science, right? You're supposed to like science. Here's a scientist what believed in God. Case closed, am I right? Like, this is just lazy appeal to hero worship kind of nonsense. This is the kind of thing that you do to, like, kind of talk a kid down from atheism when they're like 10 years old, and they're like, well, wait a minute, I really like Darwin, and Darwin had doubts, and they're like, no, Darwin was a believer, Look at Lord Kelvin over here. I'm like, if you study science more, you'll actually believe in God. You'll have no choice but to. Like, lazy.
If you study science deep enough and long enough, it will force you to believe in God. Atheists might say, well, I don't believe that something came from nothing, but it doesn't matter what they claim to believe. What matters is the implication of their belief, and if you remove God, this is all that you're left with. We even see desperate attempts to try to redefine nothing as something other than nothing.
Yeah, because nothing could be... Nothing has, and it depends on who you're talking to. Nothing has significant implications for people in physics. The notion of a total vacuum is intriguing. And do I think that Matt will deal with this charitably and fairly? Or do I think he's going to misrepresent the shit out of the science? I think it's going to be the second one.
It is literally nothing. Of course, common sense doesn't allow you to get something from nothing. Something pretty mysterious had to give rise to the origin of the universe. It is literally nothing. It is literally something nothing. You can dispute exactly what's meant by nothing, but whatever it is, it's very, very simple. And why is that funny?
How foolish and desperate people become to try to explain away the existence of God. And
I agree. That does seem the heavily edited montage-a-thon thing, that clipped-up thing, does make Richard Dawkins look extra foolish, maybe. But given that it's bits and snippets from multiple different conversations, is not exactly filling me with a lot of confidence that is like the gotcha that Matt seems to think it is. If he put that together, well, then he knows better. Then maybe you ought to just actually play the whole thing so that, in context we can see Dawkins really faceplant in the way that I think Matt thinks he did. I suspect maybe he lifted that little thing because it already had edited music behind it different than the music for his video. So I'm thinking he just pulled that from somebody else's quick assassination of a Richard Dawkins point, or just a straw man of a Richard Dawkins point, probably from years ago. In fact, I think I've seen some of those show appearances. I think they were from almost a decade ago. But,
some will even try to use metaphysics to say that things can pop into existence out of nothing. But what they don't realise is that actually requires the scientific laws to exist in the first place. That's not nothing. One thing that also points to God's existence is the fine-tuning of the universe. The universe very much appears to have been arranged to allow for intelligent life. And modern physics recognises a set of universal constants, and even
anyone who's studied the mating rituals of any other biological life forms. I'm thinking some of those videos that are out there. If you've ever seen like how hyena Is it hyena or jackals? I'm pretty sure it's hyena. Like the way their hormones govern their kind of structure, their culture, like it's just bizarre. Or famous duck penises, right? Like if you look at that, you're ready to give up on the existence of a god. There's no god because duck penises.
Even the tiniest of changes in one of these constants would not allow life to exist, or even most forms of matter as well. The chance of this universe being fine-tuned like this by accident is estimated at 1 in 10 to the power of 120. That's a lot of zeros.
Never tell me the odds.
Given that the chance of winning the lotto is 1 in 10 to the power of 9, and atheists say that this happened by coincidence, well, I don't have enough faith to believe in that, sorry. I'm going to need more evidence. The fine-tuning of the universe clearly points to a higher power that deliberately chose this arrangement. One issue for a universe with...
Yeah, but again, that gets really kind of weird, because then you end up having these issues, and I'm sure this is something that Matt will dismiss. One of the problems that I think these guys often have is in dealing with some of the explanations that science has been able to explain. And usually what ends up happening when science explains something, once it's accepted, it's not controversial for the most part anymore, unless Christians make a big deal out of it, i.e. evolution. But Christians no longer really worry about the Earth going around the sun, right? That's not really an issue, although there is a significant overlap of flat earthers who are Christians too, which, whatever. But I think the problem that a lot of these people get into, that they could probably fix with a little bit more thinking. Well, they probably can. The implications of something like evolution, right? This is one of those things that they just don't really want to deal with, probably because it challenges certain theological aspects like the Imago Dei. If humans didn't always exist and we, our ancestors were more like a marmoset, or something like that, then, or, some kind of lemur, it's kind of hard to talk about being made in God's image unless you're kind of an old earth creationist and you just sort of accept speciation, but you think the Imago Dei is something, maybe the soul or something like that. I'm not sure how they reconcile all that stuff. But this is really kind of an interesting setup to this whole thing when he's trying to talk about science. Science has usually put a lot of, especially evangelical fundamentalist Christianity, in kind of a bad spot. Usually they put themselves in a bad spot because they're the ones that usually want to adopt a kind of literal interpretation of the Bible, and they think science is kind of ruining things for them. But once it gets to a point where it's really unavoidable, they kind of have to concede the point. This would be like one of the things that usually comes up. What if we, within our lifetime, we see science develop an observable, repeatable, testable theory of abiogenesis, life originating from inorganic matter? Well, then the emphasis is going to change for a lot of these Christians, not to the how life emerged. They're just going to get really, really stuck on the why, which is usually what they're kind of preoccupied with anyway. I think that what they tend to harp on in this apologetics thing is that because science can't explain all of the how, then we need to leave the why to the Christian believer. Why the Christian believer and not the Muslim or the Jew or the Hindu, that's anybody's guess. But I think that has something to do with the Bible and revealed knowledge or something. But,
without God is also the fact of DNA and intelligent information. Give me one scientific example of intelligent information not coming from an intelligent mind. Just one example. You can't. Whether looking at the section of a book or computer software, if you have intelligent information and you can trace it back to its source, invariably you come to an intelligent mind. Therefore, when you...
Okay, but the genetic code is not actually written on you. It's not like if you look all the way into the DNA, you see DNA trademark, patent pending, something like that on there, by virtue of God Inc. That's not how that information works. Those are proteins. Those are the code is descriptions of physical proteins and interactions. So at least that's my primitive layperson, understanding of it. So this idea of like this appeal to information, like, well, it's a line of code. It must have been written by somebody. Like, okay, if you think that that's what it is, then you don't understand. Well, I'm not going to say all of science. That's not charitable. But you don't understand genetics. That because you're trafficking in something that you probably should have gotten somebody else's opinion on.
Find information transcribed along the backbone of the DNA molecule in the cell. The most rational inference based on repeated experience is that an intelligence of some form played a role in the origin of this information. No one would possibly in their right mind say that Mount Rushmore formed by accident, by the natural elements taking effect upon it. That would be ridiculous. People would laugh at you.
Does he think that, you know, when somebody, if you happen to get like a potato chip that looks like Maurice Chevalier, Simpsons reference, or if you get a piece of toast and it has burned in an image of the Virgin Mary, right? Like it's accidentally that pattern. That must have been designed too. Like that's clearly designed. Like I get the point that what he's trying to do, but the idea that like, okay, when you see faces like that, there's a difference between something being artificial and something naturally occurring. And we get better at being able to distinguish these things by studying them. What he's doing here, launching into this after doing the whole like intelligent information thing is precious.
But how much more complex is the information contained in our DNA? The late Sir Fred Hoyle, who was Professor of Astronomy at Cambridge University and was not a Christian, illustrated the point this way. Now imagine 10 to the power of 50 blind persons, that's 100,000 billion people standing shoulder to shoulder. They would more than fill our entire planetary system, each with a scrambled Rubik cube, and trying to conceive of the chance of all of them simultaneously arriving at the solved form. You then have the chance of arriving by random shuffling, random variation of just one of the many biopolymers on which life depends. The notion that not only the biopolymers, but the operating program of a living cell could be arrived at by chance in a primordial soup here on Earth is evidently nonsense of a high order. Can you give me just one example of intelligent information not coming from an intelligent mind? You can't. It's impossible.
But you haven't demonstrated that. You've straw-manned, Matt here has straw-manned this idea of DNA being intelligent information. That's not what DNA is. And just because the numbers are improbable does not mean that they are impossible. This is interesting to me, and this is something that I always wonder about. Do Christians argue that when Jesus is described as walking on water, I believe he's walking on the waters of the Sea of Galilee, is that a miracle because he's actually stepping on sea creatures, like fish large enough to hold him up, and it's just all perfectly timed, and it was just freak probability that allowed him to do that? Or is he actually defying physical law and walking on not frozen water, right? Like, so, and the reason I bring this up is because it seems to me that in a position where a Christian's not going to take a position of making something sound impossible, right? Then just highly improbable is impossible enough that this is required something to do something miraculous, maybe, but it's not really miraculous. Given a sufficient scale, this might have been the origin of our life. The biome on this earth may have been inevitable in a way, but who knows, you know? But again, I'm not going to try to point to some kind of intelligent, what did he call it? Intelligent information. So, yeah. So if you have been playing a drinking game where you take a drink every time you think you've identified a straw man, seek help. Call 911 because you're in trouble. And we still have more to go.
It's not supported by science, so why would you believe that? We can look around us and see the evidence for the existence of God. It's very plain. For what can be known about God is plain to them because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. So they are without excuse.
Neat. So if your scientific explanation requires an appeal to Romans 1, you might be a fundy.
You look at a painting, how do you know a painter was there? because of the painting. You look at a building and you know that a builder was there. You can look at creation and you can know that a creator was there. It really is that simple and obvious, but people want to deny that. Many proponents of evolution will state that evolution is a fact of science, but this cannot be further from the truth. There are numerous problems with this theory that are at odds with science.
Full disclosure, I did not make it to this point. I've heard other videos and seen other shorts from him where he does sort of a evolution's crap kind of thing. But I hadn't made it to this particular point in the video, so yeah, uncharted territory. I don't expect him to do anything except strawman the shit out of evolution, but it should be fun.
Laboratory studies have shown that organisms are capable of adaptation, the ability to shift their biology to fit their environment. These small changes are called microevolution. However, those same studies have shown that this can only go so far. A dog can change to another type of dog, but there's no evidence to suggest that a certain kind of animal can change beyond its own genetic limits and become something else. Microevolution turns a wolf into a chihuahua or a Great Dane. This is scientific. Macroevolution turns a fish into a cow. This is completely unscientific.
Agreed, because that is totally fucking wrong. That is completely wrong. What on earth is this guy talking about? This is what happens when you get your understanding of the theory of evolution from Christian apologists. Get an actual textbook on this stuff and read it. I am far from being an expert in biological science. I do not know nearly enough as I should. But I know enough to know to spot this line of horse shit from a mile away, and that is horse shit. Or cow shit. Or was it fish shit? Whatever.
Macroevolution has some major scientific impossibilities and hurdles, including irreducible complexity, the lack of transitional fossils, and much more. The reason why macroevolution is unscientific is that there is no known way for entirely new genetic information to be added to a genome as macroevolution requires. Duplications and mutations do not add new information to the genome. Duplications are the result of duplicating existing genetic information, and mutations alter existing genetic information. Neither of them adds new information. What they really can't account for is the build-up of information. One has not found a single mutation that one can point at that actually adds information. In fact, every beneficial mutation that I have seen reduces the information.
It loses it. Is Dr. Lee Spetner, by any chance, it says he's a biophysicist, is that an individual that is into that kind of genetic entropy stuff? I wouldn't be surprised if he is. I can't really comment on this other than to say this all sounds very familiar, because it sounds like what a lot of Christian apologists have thrown at this. And I have watched videos where people much smarter, much better trained, much more knowledgeable about biological and physical sciences rip this shit apart. And this guy has access to the same resources that I do. Given the quality of the living room and what looks to be a nice kitchen, he may have more resources than I do. So if he's trafficking in this, I'm going to quote from Romans 1. He is without excuse. The theory of evolution has been revealed to them in such a way that they could know. He should know better. And there's much better resources on this than this guy. It sounds like he might be cherry picking some fringe theories instead of trying to get a solid understanding of the actual one.
It loses information. Give me just one scientific example of an increase in information. You can't, because it's not scientific. If you believe that a universe is possible without God, then you have to believe that life came from non-life. Give me one scientific example, please, just one of life coming from non-life. You can't, because life comes from life 100% of the time. People will point to
Okay. So he's going to get into abiogenesis. This is good. So life comes from life 100% of the time, except for Adam and Eve. God's not alive. He's not a life form. He's spaceless, timeless, and immaterial. And he created all this stuff so he can't be this stuff. He's not a life form. So life came from non-life, if you're a Christian. That's just a simple fact. If you're a biblical literalist and you believe in the bit in there where it says God shaped the man onto clay and breathed essence into him, breathed the soul into him, then he did create life from inorganic material. That's just what it says. Now, They could say, no, that's not how this works, and life just comes from life. Okay, well then explain how life came from God. I know these people like to run around and talk about, some of them do, the living God. I don't know what a living God could be, because it can't be alive in the sense that we're alive. It doesn't grow, it doesn't change. In fact, one of its holy attributes is that it's immutable. Life, by definition, changes. And even if they don't hold to evolution, or it does sound like they hold to adaptation. You can grow stronger if you work harder. You can grow weaker if you become sick or stop exerting, yourself. So they believe in adaptation. So living things can change. God doesn't change. So let's see what he has to say about abiogenesis. Again, pretty sure gonna straw man the shit out of this too, because he's already started.
Abiogenesis, the original evolution of life or living organisms from inorganic or inanimate substances. This is an interesting theory in one's mind, but that's all it is, an idea. It cannot be scientifically demonstrated. Others will point to the Miller-Urey experiment, which was a simulation of conditions of the early Earth, testing the idea that life, or more specifically organic molecules, could have formed by nothing more than simple chemical reactions. But the problem is that this only brought about the arise of organic compounds, not life itself. If this is the best evidence you have, then you are in big, big trouble. Non-living things...
Okay, that's possible, but that's only because abiogenesis is only... there are hypotheses for these and competing ones. I think this is interesting. Like, does he really think that people who... so what's the conclusion then? Okay, well, it doesn't sound like... life could have come from non-life. I guess what I'll do, since abiogenesis hypothesis must be wrong, I will instead throw my faith behind a book that describes life coming from non-life. Nice.
Coming to life is the stuff of science fiction, not...
You mean super powerful beings that have super intelligence that come down and create life and a life giving planet for their creations and then communicate them through mysterious and supernatural ways? Sounds like science fiction.
Of science. And all life had to have come from a source of life. And God is the source of all life. Another problem with the possibility...
But he's not alive. He's not living.
...of the universe without God is the rational that we observe around us. Give me one scientific example of the rational coming from the irrational. You can't. If our brain is restricted to the physical laws of physics and chemistry, then all that it is one chemical state changing to another. It's determinism. And anything that you say, any argument you put up, I could say to you, your brain made you do that. You're not actually thinking.
Right, and as a Christian, depending on the particular Christology, well, not Christology, but the kind of eschatology that I believe in and in different theological principles that I hold to, I could also say that the reason that you might have been sick for a period of your life, that was the devil. You spent 5 years in college angry, it even held you back a year. A spirit did that. That was an evil spirit plaguing you. Wasn't you. You had a responsibility. You were supposed to ask God for help. But, if you were an atheist or you weren't a great Christian, well, those spirits were just having their way with you. I don't understand this kind of appeal to this this kind of stuff. The only thing you have then is determinism. There are plenty of people that are not inclined towards religious belief that are not determinists. In fact, I think quite a few people, if they are presented with most of the examples, kind of end up falling into like a compatibilist kind of range, if for better or for worse. I might be more inclined towards determinism, but I think that's interesting coming from a guy that believes that all of reality was created by this being that controls all and does all, not only created the universe, but sustains the universe, is somehow not deterministic. That would be an interesting theological conversation to have with Matt.
Thinking yourself, it's just your chemistry that's controlling you. So what's the point of us even talking? And
that's a good question.
If that's the case, you can't even trust the system that is giving you these thoughts. So as I said,
why does that follow? You couldn't trust the system for giving you those... If everything that is happening to you is a matter of brain states, then your subjective experience is based on those things. Now, you could reduce it down to that, but that doesn't change your subjective experience. You just reduced the cause of your subjective experience to biochemistry, states of, brain states, these kinds of things. I don't understand why this is always so difficult for a lot of Christians to understand, because it seems to me that the Christian view is to reduce everything down to my soul. How is that any different than saying it's being reduced to brain states? And if my soul can be plagued by supernatural forces and even bent in certain ways or seduced in certain ways, and that can actually have a dire physical effects on me, or effects in reality, then I don't know that that's necessarily determinism, but it just sounds like I can just reduce everything down to my spirit and other spirits banging against each other. It's just matter and energy, or it's just souls slamming together. Either way, it sounds kind of reductionist to me.
Atheists will try to frame a debate in the form that, well, I'm not making any claim, you're making the claim, so you have to support your claim. But like I said, if they're saying that there's even a possibility that there's not enough evidence for God, that a universe could even possibly exist without God, then they have to provide the evidence to show how this is possible from the science available. And looking at all of this, I can see
duck penises. I already went there. I went. Duck penises.
Clearly why they would want to shirk the burden of proof, because they don't have any evidence that can support the possibility even of a universe without God. All the science actually flies in the face of this. Also note that
it doesn't really, though. And even if it did, again, this entire argument is building towards the fact that this guy is committing himself to the argument that that other position is impossible. So you could just ask him the question, a universe is impossible without God because?
In this video, I'm not talking about evidence for the Christian God, I'm talking about the evidence for a creator God.
So this has been useless.
Talking about the evidence for who God is would be a topic for another video, and then we could explore things like biblical prophecy, the resurrection, the reliability of biblical accounts. Another thing that atheists will say is that this isn't actually evidence for God, this is just God of the gaps. Because you can't explain things, you're filling in the gaps with God. Mm-hmm. Yep. But this isn't true. This is evidence that actually points to the fact.
I didn't actually see any evidence there. What I saw was somebody desperate to characterize explanations in a way that makes it sound like the best explanation would be some kind of supernatural agent intervening in things, because if left to those processes, if left to their own devices, simply couldn't result in the natural reality that we experience. But I didn't see those natural processes actually represented accurately or correctly. I saw them strawman, and then yes, if this worldview that he's representing was true, then yeah, knocked down. Yeah, that information argument really got to me. The fact that scientists can look and see my DNA and whatever. Yeah, the fact that that's written on there in the Latin alphabet, proof that there's a God, and proof that God really wanted the Bible written in English, at least in the Latin alphabet.
That a supernatural being is required in the explanation of the universe. God has intentionally...
Okay, why would you go there? This is interesting. I mean, to me, it always seems like a supernatural explanation is an appeal to the fact that the natural isn't enough. But the natural is what we have, and if we were having an honest conversation, we're presupposing a natural reality already. But he's running into another issue here. If he wants to appeal to the supernatural, it doesn't make sense for him necessarily to say, well, in order for this material stuff to be at play and to make any sense, supernatural forces are necessary in order to explain this, to get it to work properly. Maybe. But again, why did you go to the hybrid? It could just be an entirely supernatural existence, or one entirely within the mind of God. Our experience of a physical reality is an illusion created by that mind, or created by the limitations of our own mind. Then there's no natural to contend with.
Designed the universe in this way so that it points back to him and definitively testifies of his existence. This is so unmistakable. One would have to choose to close their eyes and put their fingers in their ears not to see this.
And if they take Matt's advice here, what they have to accept is a position in which the position is really not falsifiable. All evidence points, everything is evidence for God, absolutely everything. So you're not even really evaluating evidence anymore, right? Because the idea behind evidence is that it could support this case, or it could be in support of the opposite case, or it could just not really do much of anything. It doesn't add or take away from the case being made. But that's not really where what's being implied here. Everything is evidence for God. Okay, so what was the point of even bringing this up, other than to get yourself wrapped up in this unique trap? A world, a universe without God is impossible. That is a hell of a claim. You need to explain the why and the how of that, other than just asserting that, well, because you need a God. If that's all you're going to do is just say, well, this world is impossible, you need a God. Okay. Explain how and explain why. Most of the explanations that we have in terms of the how don't always support the why, especially when it's, if you're a literalist. That's what we get when we start talking about human evolution and the previous things we came from. It's very convenient for him. He doesn't believe in evolution. He just discards that. So this guy's not scientific at all. So this whole thing is just an exercise in his weird way of completely mutilating science, rationality, and reason.
The fool says in his heart there is no God. And what atheists are actually doing is science of the gap, pseudoscience of the gap. They're saying, well, if we wait long enough, then there'll be enough evidence that we'll be able to explain these things. And many atheists will say, well, I simply don't know. I'm humble enough to say that I don't know. But it's not an issue of saying I don't know. The scientific evidence actually contradicts the position that a universe could even exist without the possibility of God.
But he hasn't demonstrated that. The only way that he's been able to kind of come close to demonstrate that is by crafting these straw men that make it sound like it would be impossible without some kind of intelligent super being in charge of all of these processes. I think that's interesting, though. Well, you take the humble position that you just don't know. He already ruled that out at the beginning. An individual who's not convinced by this kind of stuff wouldn't know what to do this. And then he's got the cute little meme of somebody like, oh, the beleaguered atheist just doesn't, they don't accept the penguin as evidence for God. Kind of interesting that he would demonstrate that one. I don't think that this guy believes in homosexual relationships, and yet he's penguins problematic. Anyway, that push right there, that little switch is very dishonest, right? It's great that you're honest enough to admit that you don't think that you're convinced, or you're not you're not there yet. Well, let me just show you all this stuff, and here's why. Notice everything about this is about how science can't do things, right? It's all about the limitations of science. So the evidence for God is the stuff that science can't. They think science doesn't explain right for them, right? Evolution doesn't get us to this. Abiogenesis is just well, they don't even get this right. It's just, there's several hypotheses, but there's no workable theory. Granted, nobody's contesting that. What about entropy? What about the expansion of the universe? What about the Big Bang? That's an explosion that created everything, and explosions just cause chaos. So there must have been something supernatural making sure that everything got settled in order. Otherwise, that explosion would have just been a huge mess. Okay, so once you get there and you have this individual who's like, yeah, I don't accept your explanations about these. I think you're misrepresenting the science. And what am I supposed to do? You believe this story. I'm not convinced. Where do we go from here? Does Matt just call them stupid? What's he going to do if their position is like, I don't know if Matt's ever heard of doxastic involuntarism and how he plans to get around that. I think he's just hoping like, well, here, I've laid out my argument. Now you just have to accept God as a rational conclusion. Well, if that's the case, where's the faith? Now you've just made God a conclusion that one should reach. You haven't based it on faith. And if it's a rational conclusion and there's no room to doubt, what the hell is any of that nonsense in the Bible about doubting Thomas, who wants to see evidence? He had to stick his hand, in the wound of Jesus. I want to evaluate that this is really the guy. Right? And Jesus is like, yeah, I get that, but blessed are those who believe without seeing. But you might as well just chuck that shit out the window, because that's not the Christianity any of these guys are peddling now.
Many scientists have many things to say on this issue, and they will forcefully try to push the fact that things like evolution are a fact, and all of this other nonsense, that something can come from nothing. but nonsense spoken by
Yeah, nonsense is right. Jefferson having flashbacks to previous debates and stages. Yeah, this really does feel like a lot of them just kind of distilled, like popped into a blender and turned into an insanity smoothie.
scientists is still nonsense. I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. I cannot believe.
Okay, and again, if Matt happens to watch these, I just want to point this out. Frank Turek and the other guy that did that, was it Norman something? I can't remember who it was. He was kind of a jerk. At least he came across as a jerk, but apologies if he was nice to anybody else. But anyway, the apologists that came up with that kind of thing, if you want to compare atheism to a faith system, faith systems are really kind of hard to debunk because if it is my faith, then that's all I'm just going to lean into, especially if you're going to lean into it for me. Like, I'm sorry that you have lack of faith, but I do have the faith to be an atheist. So come at me with something else. I mean, you can miss me with this stuff. The whole point of doing that was the idea, like, oh, we'll get them good. The thing that they hate the most is that they will stick them with this, because if we just call them, faith-based, then they're terrified of being considered irrational, then they'll abandon their convictions. I can't really abandon my convictions because the one thing I'm not convinced of is the reality of a creator God. So if you want to call that position, and I don't care if you call me an atheist or an agnostic, I really do not care at all. But if you want to say that that's a faith position, go right ahead. Now, what you've given me is a giant out. I can just say, it's my faith. Leave me alone.
In what completely flies in the face of all of the available evidence. Atheists will try to frame this whole debate with this false dichotomy of science versus the unscientific, the intellectual versus the unintellectual, the rational versus the irrational, but that is a false dichotomy. And I'm going to stand on the side of the great scientists like Isaac Newton and Michael Faraday and many other scientists who believed in God, and even some of them who specifically believed in the Christian God. This isn't a matter of the science versus faith versus the unscientific, the intellectual versus the unintellectual. This is a matter of looking at the evidence and going wherever the evidence points, no matter how uncomfortable that makes you feel. Labeling these things as...
Agreed. So, Matt, what's your hold-up? What's your hang-up with evolution, then? You should be able to do that with evolution, but you have no problem just pretending that that's not what it is. And if guys like Matt believe in general revelation and believe that it's significant, maybe not as special revelation, obviously, special gets that adjective on there, then evolution is a part of general revelation, and it's an important thing for us to consider, because it would be the mechanism that God used in order to determine speciation amongst living things on His created earth. But Matt is denying that in his unrighteousness.
Science. Chanting mantras that it's a scientific fact, just like a Buddhist monk, just chanting those mantras doesn't actually make it science. It doesn't make it science any more than me saying that I am the Incredible Hulk, and that's a fact, makes me the Incredible Hulk.
Yeah, except that that's a dumb comparison and easily dismissed. That's the worst straw man and the worst Photoshop I think I've ever seen.
It's nonsense.
Yeah, it is nonsense. It would be nonsense if people were insisting that science is science because they chant it. But here's the thing. Fully embracing straw man arguments and misrepresentations of popular, and essentially these are popular apologetics, but they're ways of misrepresenting things like cosmology, physics, chemistry, biology, evolution. That doesn't lead to anything either, and it's not a great look if you're trying to be the one. Like, this is just Christianity trying to take science away from the atheist, right? They're trying to snatch that away from them because we're sitting in the sandbox fighting over whose idea of a super boss is, or the sky king or whatever. And now these guys are like, they were tired. They didn't like the fact that Hitchens and Dawkins and others have come along and said, you know what, we don't like these ideas. We don't like religion. We don't like its influence. We don't like some of its cultural baggage. And then they said insulting and ridiculing things of it. And now these guys are hurt, and so they're going to take science away from these guys because they can't handle it. But Matt has demonstrated that he doesn't know it. I don't think he could recognize science, that the real thing. He can recognize the strawman explanations of things that he believes Christianity should debunk. I don't know what this guy does for the rest of his evolution videos, but I'm sure they're terrible.
I find when I'm discussing things with atheists, they become very uncomfortable when they are the ones who are having to answer the questions. Give me one example of life coming from non-life. There's not one.
But see, this is the appeal that a lot of these guys make. You need to be able to account for all of these unexplained things in the natural world, and if you can't, that's a better case for our God. It isn't. That's actually the problem. If you believe that, then you are holding an irrational position. Then it's just like, well, why is it this way rather than that way? I think it's because there's a God. Okay, well, what if that's not the case? It doesn't matter. I just think that's the best explanation, and that's what I'm running with. Okay, if you get to the point where literally everything that you see in the world around you is evidence for your God, how are you ever going to be open to possibly falsifying that? You have an unscientific frame of mind at that point. Literally everything is evidence for your God, so you don't really need to worry about it ever being falsified. Then you can just stand there, just bewildered that I just don't understand how anybody could be convinced otherwise. Well, it was supposed to be a faith system, and it was supposed to be about hoping in something that was unseen, but now Christianity, apparently, thanks to these apologists, has become something as obvious as 2 + 2 = 4, which I think, if there is a Jesus, he might have something to say about that, because that's not really how I think things were supposed to work.
There's not one example of intelligent information not coming from an intelligent mind, of something coming from nothing, of the rational coming from the irrational. And this just exposes the fact that their position is not based on science, testable, observable, repeatable. It's based on pseudoscience and philosophy.
Pseudoscience. I think that's a different word. It seems that for a time religion was quietly okay with science until scientific understanding began to push it off the board. Yeah, and this seems to be this kind of weird attempt. And it used to be enough that they would just come after the scientists and say, and they still do, right? They'll come after and attack scientists for being anti-God, and this isn't science. It's part of an anti-God agenda. They're trying to erase the existence of God or something like that, which is always kind of a goofy thing to put forward. But even if they were right, like, okay, let's say that the scientist was motivated by an animosity towards religions. It doesn't necessarily mean that their theories are wrong. But these guys have a problem with that, because that's one of those kind of rational positions that they can't hold on to long enough. Well, that person's mean, so by definition that person must be wrong. Nope, that's not rational. And if rationality is supposed to be a gift granted to you by the revelation of God, you might want to check with your service provider, because I think your signal's weak or something.
So that they can desperately try to avoid the obvious, that is, that God exists. Friends, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell to receive notifications.
So this was horrible because, one, it's not scientific, and it's also probably the worst way to actually deal with religion. So you can actually reach this conclusion and then be kind of smugly comfortable on the fact that, oh, well, God just exists, and it must be the case, and it requires zero faith, no faith at all. You can trust Matt that it's as plain as the nose on your face, or the sums that you make in your checkbook, or that cute penguin, marrying that same-sex penguin, which that's a difficult thing for you guys to deal with, or species of animals spontaneously switching not genders but sexes. Why would God allow something like that? A whole variety of other, or the fact that life has only been here for a tiny fraction of the time that the Earth has been present. Okay, so yeah, from all of that, we were supposed to conclude that you don't need faith to believe in Jesus. What you need to do is crack a textbook and then come to the conclusion that God is an inevitable conclusion from any scientific pursuit, except for a study in evolutionary biology, which just is some kind of conspiracy against our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, according to Matt. Great job, Matt. Did not convince me. That's not science that you were talking about. That you actually were debunking just straw man scientific explanations. Get better at doing this because this was weak. He's not going to change this. I also, you're welcome. If you can clip this shot of his face here, this is pretty good. I should take a screen grab of that for the next video I cover on this guy, if he's any good. Yeah, like this video if you appreciate the fact that I'm covering this guy. I might cover more videos in the future, but otherwise I will leave it at that. Let me do this. I'm going to include the StreamYard link in here if anybody would like to join for the tail end of it. Okay, I'm going to pin that in case anybody wants to join it. AJ, if you're still here, I know he was interested in coming on and talking. But if anybody wants to join and chat about this for another, probably stand for another 10, 20 minutes for this one and then wrap it up. So, but yeah, that's pretty much it for Lion of Fire Ministries. Whoa, Rotangelo. I have to mute your mic because you got some really weird static going on. Very, very weird. Kind of a high-pitched shrieking thing happening with your mic. Still happening. Hello, Deathan. How's it going?
Going good.
I don't think you've ever jumped on live before, have you? Or maybe after the fact, after I went off air. Yeah, Tangelo, that sounds better. Whatever that squeaking noise was, it's gone.
No, I haven't joined before.
Okay, yeah.
Just getting into the swing of things.
Yeah. So yeah, unfortunately, this wasn't my usual Darth or J. Robin stuff, but yeah, when I saw this, it was such a nice distillation of a lot of bad arguments from from apologists that I was like, okay, this guy kind of knocked it out of the park. In 15 minutes, he pretty much gets a lot of stuff I think wrong. Let's see. Welcome, Jody, AJ, and JL. How are you guys doing?
Good. How are you?
Doing pretty good. Nice to see you.
I just thought of a spin-off show for you.
All right.
I just thought of a spin-off show for you. You can review the living rooms of all of the Christian people that are out there making videos. It can just be your commentary on all of them.
Well, Matt's definitely in the lead then, because that is a quality living room. I wonder if that's you know how some apartment complexes have those, the waiting room and they have the kitchen ensuite for doing banquets and stuff. That's almost what it looks like he's in, but I think that's just his house, because I think he does his I think he's got his health video stuff where he does cooking and stuff. It happens in the kitchen behind him. So.
Okay. Well,
hey, sir.
Are we sure he doesn't live with his parents?
Oh.
I don't know. Maybe he is. Maybe he's living with his parents. He's independently wealthy. I mean, it could be.
I don't know.
If my parents had a house like that, even at the tender age of 40-something, I'd still live with them. Yeah. You've got six bedrooms and they're all en suite. Yeah, I'm moving in.
That's good. Your parents are probably going, "Oh, thank goodness we don't have that big of a house." Thanks.
Yeah, there's something really weird about having a middle-aged son just roaming the halls of our house. They'd get real sick of my live streams. They wouldn't matter.
Who is Slasher Movie breathing into their microphone?
I don't know. I'm hoping it's Death Hand, given that he's got the Doctor Doom. But I don't think.
I'm sorry.
I don't know.
Mic a little too close. Here, let me change it.
I muted just to make sure it wasn't me.
Yeah, I don't hear it. Yeah,
there.
Yeah, okay, yeah. It might be. You might have a little bit of a hot mic there. Leave it to JL to identify that mic. Yeah, who's stalking the live stream?
I'm coming for you, and you can't get away.
I'm already picturing somebody with a machete.
I'm watching from the bushes.
I can't remember what movie that was where somebody it was a comedy. Somebody picks up the phone.
Yes, it was. I know it was the breather is who the bad guy was, and he would kill people in ridiculous ways. Like I remember which one you're talking about.
Is it the one where he calls a woman and she hangs up on him, and then he calls right back. She picks up the phone and he goes, "I said."
Yes, that was it.
Sounds like not another teen movie or one of those.
Yeah, it could have been one of those bad ones, but whatever it was, that was a particularly good gag. I was like, that's pretty good. But I want to say I think it was
Student Bodies.
Student. Oh, perfect. Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
because the person that I think told me about it was really into kind of like cult flicks, horror flicks. So it wouldn't have been like one of the teen movies or one of those spoofs. Anyway, anybody?
Speaking of horror, this video that you just watched.
Yeah. It kind of inspired me. Like I kind of want to get into doing like, maybe it's because I watched Severance. I kind of want to write a story about a cult, and I could kind of base it on a little bit on the church that I grew up in, because they got a little cult-like diet cult. But actually, that might be a decent title for it. But anyway, like maybe based in Australia or something, because it seems like between like the American Midwest and Australia, between those two places in the world, just kind of create like kind of a fundamentalist Christian kind of outlook on stuff, and they all kind of swap the same stuff. But any so like kind of go around the room. Thoughts, opinions, takes.
This kind of stuff like infuriates me, because it's not just a matter of it's not just a misrepresentation of science that may be on the cusp, or of hypotheses that are out there, but it's a complete misrepresentation of established science, of like what we know to be true. Like we know this to be a reality. Evolution is a fact. We understand that the nuances and the intricacies of it, and trying to attack it on these grounds, or that we're making up these weird claims like matter can't, like consciousness can't come from matter, something of that nature, and crap like that. And it really it pisses me off. It really aggravates me. It's a big pet peeve, and I apologize for the all caps post in your live chat, because I was like, no, it's absolutely wrong. And then the whole like genetic entropy thing, John Sanford's work. Trying to basically rebrand error catastrophe, which has never been demonstrated or even induced in the lab. It's not a thing that can occur. So I don't know. That for me, it's just like I get really agitated when I see just blatant misrepresentation of science, especially when you can pick up any high school textbook and realize everything that they were saying was wrong.
Yeah, I think they would be in a better position if they're going to do this kind of stuff. If the goal as sort of Christians is to sort of like wrestle, science back away from, so that it's not this whole, hey, we're being deemed the anti-science irrational crowd, and the atheists are supposedly running around patting themselves on the back for being like pro-science and the big brains. We're here to prove that that's not the case. Okay, fine. Start with representing the science accurately.
Right.
And don't just say, oh, well, Francis Collins, therefore Jesus. Don't do that. That doesn't work.
And I assume you saw that, because he puts Francis Collins up there, and I actually like Francis Collins. And Francis Collins was actually was Hitchens' favorite theist to talk to, because Collins was at least intellectually honest about his positions. The man flat out said in his book, he wrote a book, I think it was called The Language of God, which he's talking about genetics, and because the guy is just like bonkers, ridiculous smart when it comes, or educated when it comes to biological science and genetics. And he stated in that book that you cannot use logic and reason to get to God. It requires faith. You have to be able to take that leap and go forward with no evidence and put yourself out there like that. There's no other way to get to God. And yes, he recognizes that that is an irrational thing to do, to simply accept a thing based upon whatever personal utility or whatever emotional satisfaction it gives you. But he recognizes it. He calls it out for what it is. It has utility for him. This is probably why you don't see Francis Collins running around evangelizing to people.
I can accept that in him, because he's being honest. He's being totally, utterly honest, and about what it does for him. Who is the other famous evolutionary scientist who is an open Catholic? He also debated the creationists and went after them. But he also talks the same way, that this is what he believes. It's his faith, it's his testament, it's his personal view, but he doesn't try to swing the science to make it correspond with whatever his view is. And I totally respect both of those guys for it. I don't agree, but I respect.
Yeah.
Are you talking about what's his name? Kenneth Miller?
That's it. Yep.
Yeah, Kenneth Miller
He was
from.
the
I
lost-
think he's
yeah.
I think he's out of Brown, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, when it comes down to being intellectually honest, and it comes down to not understanding that you can assert certain things that are true because they're based upon evidence, because we've tested them, we understand them, and we're at that point. Lightning no longer comes from God. Essentially, we look back. If you look back in the history of humankind, go back 150,000 years or whatever, when animism was a thing. Or you talk about when primitive peoples believed that lightning was the force of God that was coming down. And then, obviously, there would be people who would probably question that. It was like, well, is that what it is? And they would start looking into that. Do you think that those people weren't, that the religious-minded or the shamans or the religious leaders of the time would say, don't question God. We don't look into these things. We don't question the authority of this being. But they questioned it anyway. And of course, you look at Galileo and all the other individuals who challenged the positions of the church and wound up paying for it. But now we realize it led us further in our understanding. This is literally the argument. Literally, what they have is the argument for lightning coming from God, and it's just jumping it forward hundreds of years to the point where it's now it's where did everything coming from? Our understanding of quantum fields and how quantum fields operate and how they fluctuate. It's getting pushed further and further off the board. That's why it's no longer God is in the sky, God walks amongst us, or whatever. Now it's God is this metaphysical, intangible entity that exists outside of space and time and is a mind. And it's like, it turned from a being that walks on earth amongst men and interacts with them and speaks to them.
Has sex with them. Don't forget, has sex with them.
And has
better
gone,
gods, right? I mean,
it's gone from like the Zeus style god, because Zeus did all this stuff, and then it's gone from this form of god to this like unfalsifiable entity that exists in a state that we know can't actually be. I guess it's like in its own little like what do they call it? Partitioned off area of reality that we can't access. Yeah. That it's like sitting there, like Doom in his armor from Latveria, going, "Ha! I've got my fingers on the zeitgeist." It's like it's freaking weird, but it's obvious. It's obvious. We, as we've gone through time and we've begun to understand things, slowly but surely, the miracles that were the things we're posited as miracles, we now understand as natural phenomena. We can explain them naturally. We can replicate them. We can make predictions off of them. And this is just one more at a time. Now we're finally up to the mechanism by which life showed up on the planet, which we are on the verge of understanding how that happened, and how the universe came into being. We're on the verge, and eventually we'll explain those. And guess what? And this goes to Otangelo. Guess what, dude? There will be more questions after that. Yep. When we answer life, when we answer abiogenesis, when we answer the how the universe came into being pre Big Bang. Yep. That will lead to more questions. And guess what? Your God will get pushed to that area and further and further along. So, it's just the nature of the beast.
But so is God a possible explanation?
God's a possible explanation, but it's not a great explanation.
Yeah.
If you're positing a being that just literally, like that was a big issue that I had with Matt's little video there, is that if you've got two people that are essentially talking about like how would you explain the universe that we have, and this person is not convinced that there's a some kind of supernatural agent, well then Matt's quick to be like, then you're committed to an explanation. You need to explain away all this stuff without a supernatural agent. Well, that's kind of a goofy move, because even if you could get even if you're positing the existence of a supernatural being, it sort of removes you really needing to worry about the details of the how. To the point where even when we have details about how, say, something like speciation happens in terms of evolution, you've got somebody like Matt denying that aspect of science because it's inconvenient for his beliefs. Well, he's just kind of shooting himself in the foot. Like, okay, if speciation is happening. That's a natural process, and all that aspect, that dynamic interplay and adaptation of life that we observe, that should make more of a case for the fact that somebody would come along and say, yeah, actually evolution needs to be guided by some kind of creator being. But that's not the position that a lot of Christians take. They're just like, oh no, evolution can't be right because that's just Christians trying to divorce God from the universe that we live in and say that we came from monkeys and it's all chance. And so because they don't like the consequences, they just sort of deny it.
I think
So
AJ's
Jeff, what evidence would you expect in order to say, okay, it seems now that the evidence points more towards a creator being the best explanation rather than not? What would you expect to observe in the natural world?
More
so
order,
first of all,
but
I reject the idea that that God is an explanation for anything. I can hold up this bag and say, in this bag I have what I'd call, it's defined as a sufficiently a perfectly sufficient widget. This widget, whatever it is, perfectly describes and accounts for everything definitionally. So what have I done? Now this thing can account for everything in the universe because I defined it that way. Does it explain anything? It doesn't explain anything. It's just it's a placeholder. It's a generic placeholder that has zero explanatory power whatsoever. I've just given this thing attributes to say this explains everything. That's all you're doing with your God. That's
essentially, Otangelo, the best analogy I could probably give for this is like two people trying to like sell a clock to somebody. And if I'm going to buy a clock and I don't know, you've invented a clock. Like if two people come up, they have a clock and they want to sell it to me because I need it. So so I ask you, like Otangelo's going to sell me the clock. I ask you, okay, so what does this thing do? And you say it tells time. It allows you to meter out time in the day so that you can better schedule the event, the stuff that you have to do. And you can make the most efficient use of the time that you have during daylight hours. That's great. I asked the other guy, what does it do? He says the exact same thing. Great. How does it do it? Like, how does it doing this? Like, how did you make this happen? And then you can't give me an answer. Your answer is, it just does. It just does it. Whereas the other guy can give me a breakdown as to how the clock works, how it's timed, what I need to do to, like, consistently ensure that it maintains correct time, as far as like seconds, minutes, hours, so on and so forth. And he's providing me all the explanations I've got. You're not providing me anything. You're simply saying it does. And that doesn't work as far as explanations go. And plus, what Jefferson Spatchcock said, the very first answer to your question is, what would we expect to see if this entity with its attributes created everything and was at the head of all this? First and foremost, we would expect to see efficiency, especially if this entity is all-knowing. We would see efficiency and we would see order. We do not see these things. Just as, and I'm kind of loath to quote him, but it was a really good point in Dawkins's book, Darwinian Look at Life. In that book that he wrote, he basically says, if we were to look to, when we observe the system we have right now, we cannot derive anything like a god or coming from a god from it, if God is to have those attributes. Now, that statement alone doesn't say that God doesn't exist. It says that the Christian God as defined does not exist. We cannot make a determination about this thing. It's an unfalsifiable hypothesis that remains, untestable and unobservable, and we can't do anything with it. So you're free to hold. It's unverifiable. You're free to hold on to it, Otangelo, of course. You have that freedom. But you can't run around positing it as truth, and this is the way, when there are better explanatory models that make better predictions and give us a further understanding of the universe that we reside in and what to expect from the universe that we reside in. You can't run around claiming it's the truth and not expect people to call you irrational.
What I would expect to see if there was a God that was created the universe is something along the lines of, hello, my name is God and welcome to my YouTube channel. I mean, that is the kind of thing that would be expected. In all of the stories that we tell of gods and all the stories that we tell of heroes, they are present and they interact with us. They are there. We see them. They're doing their stuff. You can talk to them. You can do whatever to them. It is in the real world that we keep pushing these gods. We push a god into more and more of our imagination. We don't ask for those same kind of things, and the God that is proposed by so many people just takes on the character of nothing. You can make it say anything you want to, and it's not satisfactory.
AJ, I would like to respond to what you said.
Well, here's an interesting question, actually, because we've answered your question, Otangelo. No, hang on a second, Otangelo. Otangelo, stop. Here's the real question.
You talk a lot.
I do. I do happen to talk a lot. I do, because
we have a rule of
But guess what, Otangelo? Guess
what?
what?
You should not just concentrate the entire conversation and only you talk and the others not.
So, Otangelo, here's the real thing that you need to.
I would like to respond to AJ.
You can, but I'm giving you this. Here's what you
gave me so many things which I cannot respond to.
Well, then buck up, kiddo, because you're going to get more. So here's the thing that you really need to suss out: the entity that you believe in, that you call God, and the attributes that you have defined it as having, that you think that it has. Okay, the logical entailments of this thing don't mix with what we've got, because here's the biggest problem. Why would an entity that you've described, knowing supposedly what it knows, everything, all true propositions infallibly, so on and so forth, why would it need to rely on faith? Why would this be a necessary thing for this entity? It wouldn't be. If it existed, faith would not be a necessary thing. Knowledge would be the greatest power because it knows everything infallibly. So why not just do what Jody said and just let us know that it's there? Because just because God let us know it's there doesn't mean, and it could answer all these questions, but it also doesn't mean that people wouldn't follow it. Mm-hmm. Because if all of a sudden this thing showed up and said, hey, I'm God, I created everything, and I'm up, and I'm here, and everything I'm talking about is true, then this leads to dialogue, to talking with God. This puts the onus on God to explain everything, because God's the one that kicked the football and everything. So why is this God so explanation shy? Why is it so burden of proof shy? What's the problem with that? Why does it require faith and the absolute worst mistakes in human reasoning to justify its existence and belief in it, when it could just come out and say, here I am? And then people still have free will and the ability to choose, because then the question becomes not whether or not it exists, but whether or not we should worship it. Mm-hmm. Which is just one more question after the fact. Once one question is answered, another one pops up. What is this God's problem with this? Because it says nothing about this anywhere in the Bible, and no one can, and I've never met a theist that can answer this question. The floor is yours.
That being said, I am here.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
Welcome, Peter. Hang on. I saw you, Peter, and I'm nervous about it. Otangelo, go ahead.
No, I wanted to give Otangelo the chance to talk, and then I've got a question for him.
Okay.
Well, AG, I agree with you. You can come up with silly propositions, but I think when it comes to explain our existence, we should put on the table all possible explanations, and illogical explanations are of course not possible because they are illogical. But if I am telling you that my proposition is either there is a God, which I describe as eternal, powerful, intelligent, conscious, or not, then that description, there is nothing inherently illogical in that description.
Yeah, there might be. Hang on a second.
But there you go, just defining God.
Hang on. We passed
Why doesn't
the
he
hour
do it
and
himself?
We passed the hour and a half mark, so I'm going to actually take this off live. If you guys want to continue this conversation, we can. We can keep talking.
I've been holding back my hot takes this whole time.
So. I couldn't join earlier. I did 2 shows about, well, basically science fiction. It was both were about evolution, which obviously didn't happen.
Well, I don't. Yeah.
I do have one question for Otangelo while we're still live.
Go ahead.
Otangelo, do you know who Neil Shubin is?
Not in my head right now. Maybe if you give me a...
I'll help you out.
As soon as he Googles it.
I'll help you out. He was one of a team who used the theory of evolution to make a prediction in fine tiktaalik. I just spoke with the guy just a few hours ago, which was pretty cool.
That's one of the cool things about like theories, because we can use theories to make predictions about reality, and then when we go and we look for those, we find, oh, it's real. Therefore,
yes,
because the prediction comes true, it affirms the model. It's this amazing thing. It's called science. Oh my god!
I think there's a language problem here. We have to...
and just the opposite of that is that recently it came out that the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea, that was thought to be the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea, turns out not to be the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. So if your model were true, Otangelo, why can't it make predictions? Why doesn't the Bible tell us where the tomb was that Jesus supposedly resurrected in? Why don't we have the cross? Why don't we have any outside literature that describes Jesus, that describes the crucifixion, that describes the resurrection, that describes the hundreds of people that arose from their grave the moment Jesus resurrected? Why is all of that just in the Bible and nowhere else on the planet? Why did we have a flood? Why did we have a flood and the Egyptians failed to notice, had a continuing history all throughout, before and after the flood? So had the Chinese. Those people must be incredibly stupid.
And the Aborigines. I mean, nobody,
yes,
because the whole continent of Australia was left out of that.
Yeah,
everyone drowned, and they forgot
Peter,
to notice.
Peter, a month ago I was in Jerusalem and I saw the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. I saw the
no, you were
the old town of Jerusalem where the Via Dolorosa. I saw where Christ was flagellated, where he was judged
where you think it was.
That's what where he spent the last meal with the disciples and Gethsemane. I saw. I went to Tiberias, to the region of Galilee. I saw the archaeological sites of Capharnaum, and I've been in Nazareth, and I mean it was an amazing experience, and it made very curious what I actually read in the New Testament. And
I am curious, Otangelo. I'm going to ask you a question since you were there. Did you find the parking lot where apparently there was a cave underneath in which they found the Ark of the Covenant? Ron Wyatt found it, and he found Jesus's blood, which still was alive. Did you find that too?
Otangelo, last week I was at Lloyd. I was at the York Archaeological Research Center looking at the Lloyd's Bank coprolite, which is the largest human poo ever excavated. What does it matter where you were?
So, Peter, no, I don't believe in that they did find the Ark of the Covenant.
So what you're saying is that Ron Wyatt was a liar, the guy who confirmed the site where Moses crossed the sea, the end of the Exodus, the guy who confirmed literally everything in the Bible. He found everything.
Well, I didn't study the claim of the covenant, but he also claimed that he did find the Noah's Ark in near Mount
Ararat. And what he brought is the best part.
And that site definitely is not the site where Noah's Ark landed.
Because the piece of wood that he brought from there...
The Bible inclusively says that Noah's Ark landed on the top of Mount Ararat and not nearby.
And Noah's Ark is a repurposed story from the other Mid-Eastern...
Actually, it doesn't say the mountain of Ararat. It says the mountains, plural, of Ararat.
That's okay. That's sufficient.
And the funniest thing is what Wyatt brought home was a piece of the Ark, which actually was a railroad tie, which was made to look old by an atheist and then sold to Ron Wyatt, which is still one of the most hilarious things I've ever heard.
Yeah, that doesn't disprove the Bible. That just demonstrates that there are people out there.
No, Otangelo. It does. It's not that it disproves the Bible. What it says is that there are areas of the Bible that are not real, that don't represent reality. Okay, and if the Bible is the literally as you believe, the breathed word of God, then obviously there's something wrong here. Because why would God inspire a story that is not based in reality? Especially when we know, absolutely, it is a fact that the biblical narrative of the flood was directly taken from the Sumerian myth.
I don't believe that.
Well,
it's the truth.
Ken Ham built the flood. Ken Ham built the ark with power tools and all kinds of machinery. And guess what? They're having problem with fucking water. They're literally their wood's getting destroyed by water.
I can go 40 miles from my house and get on the Millennium Falcon. Clearly, Star Wars is real.
Otangelo, the best literary scholars on the planet have looked into this. Okay, and from the evidence. We know, and from archaeology, from everything, all the fields of science that have looked into this, we can trace the movement of that myth from Sumer, all the way to the Bible, and all the steps in between, and how it's changed over time.
Yeah, you know that I disagree with that, JL.
But then you literally are rejecting evidence, Otangelo.
That's what you're claiming.
Stories are...
But JL, to be fair...
Oh, my sweet summer child.
JL, to be fair, I recently heard a Christian claim that Noah probably had what back then was the version of the Amish who were the workers who helped him build his boat. I'm not even kidding.
Yeah.
I'm not kidding.
Even the Amish couldn't build an ark out of gopher wood, wherever the fuck that is. They made that shit up. To house all these animals. Otangelo, how do you come to be? What I find hysterical is Otangelo comes to us. His biggest argument is that atheism can't explain he gives us these crazy statistics saying it can't be the case that atheism is true because you guys can't explain how proteins could form over whatever these things. He believed, but he's fucking trying to pass off to us that the ark could happen. Do you see the irony there?
And the weird expectation that there is a
on Mount Ararat and saw the ark. Have you seen these videos? I can put you a link. You can look it up.
Yes, I've seen them and I've debunked them, dude. This weird expectation that you have, Otangelo, that atheists have to come up with these explanations. Okay, atheism is a result of rejecting your claim. A claim has to be made, and then someone can reject it. All right? And atheists didn't run around saying there's no God, and then all of a sudden the theist said, well, I think there is. No. God is an explanation. Gods are explanations for phenomena. Mm-hmm. Zeus.
You've been hanging out with Darth Hawkins too much,
Zeus.
You turn your mind into mush.
Zeus, Ra, you name it across the board. The Japanese once believed a dragon lived underneath Mount Fuji, and every time it rumbled, it was because the dragon was upset. Okay, so gods are explanations for phenomena. They have been. All of the gods that you don't believe in, that you don't reject, were all at one time used as explanations for phenomena. Those who rejected those explanations were by definition atheists. It is not the atheist's job to fill in the gaps in your knowledge. The atheist rejects your position and is an atheist by default. Okay? You're a theist.
And why should I care about what you don't believe in? I care about what you positively believe and why. Weak atheists.
Yeah, okay. And I can answer that. I can answer that in one fell swoop.
What do I positively believe? That's a problem. I don't get it. What do we positively believe? That's a problem, Otangelo.
I can cover that in one fell swoop. I believe in evidence, novel testable predictions, and the ability to understand my reality to the absolute best that I can.
That's not an alternative to God.
Yes, it is.
That's a method to investigate things, but it is not an alternative.
But guess what?
to God.
But even if I took your standard there, which I don't, but even if I did take your standard, God doesn't explain anything. Just as AJ said previously, God does not explain anything. God provides no mechanistic explanation for anything. Otangelo. Okay, what does? How about the universe? The quantum field.
What created?
What do you want to talk? Like you name it. You name it. We can break it down to its smallest parts, dude. But the reality of it is,
what created your quantum field?
The quantum field is always there, always, eternally.
How do you know that? And how do you know that?
Because we know what quantum fields are, Otangelo.
That doesn't answer
hang on. Otangelo, anyone can come along and just say, how would you respond to? I think it's kind of childish, but like, what created the conditions necessary for a god to emerge in some spaceless, timeless void?
I don't know.
I'm curious about the question Otangelo just asked. Hold on, I'm curious about the question. Wait a minute. I'm curious about the question Otangelo just asked. How do you know the quantum fields always existed? You tell me. How do you know God always existed?
Through revelation and through
because he revealed it.
Because he revealed. Well, guess what, dude? That is just your subjective experience.
Hang on a second. AJ's been raising his hand for a minute now.
So just to respond to what Otangelo asked me earlier, because he asked me what sort of universe I would expect if his God was real. So assuming we're talking about the perfect Christian God, then I would say that anything that is capable of imperfection is not perfect. So I would expect a perfect universe. So Otangelo, it's on you to convince me that what we're experiencing right now is fucking perfect.
Well, I don't think the Bible says that when God created the world, it was very good. It wasn't perfect.
Right?
Okay?
Is God
perfect?
What
does good mean? By that measure, I don't know what good means when you say good, Otangelo.
I know what
really
hang on.
Can you explain that?
Then by definition, God is not perfect.
Everybody's trying to interject at the same time.
Maybe it was a few billion years ago when the Earth was a lifeless ball of molten rock. That was when it was perfect because there was no life on it to screw everything up.
I really do. I think this is important, right? Because like they say these things all the time. It was good. What does that mean? According to I don't understand. Like there's no like. You haven't given any metric for that, Otangelo. What do you mean to say like when God created it was good?
Actually, hang on. Good mean? I wanted to put a pin in this because I will have to wrap this up here pretty quick. Serb, did you have anything you wanted to add to this conversation before we take this off air?
I was just going to chime in with a couple things. You're all wrong. God created diorama and we just fucked it up.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I'm gonna let that be the last word on things. I'm gonna wrap this up. We can take this off air. I'm gonna end this. Thank you everybody in the live chat. It's always been fun.
Yeah.
Thanks for indulging me while I'm looking for different Christian content to cover. So thank you everybody for showing up live. Thanks for your comments, your likes, all that good stuff. Take care of yourself, and we are going to sign out of here. And thank you everybody for jumping in on the live panel. We're probably going to continue to chat a little bit and yell at each other.
Yeah.
Actually, we're just gonna let Cerberus remind us how wrong we all are. So,
I agree with you. You made a good comment, and it's great that there are two now that are in common agreement.
Okay.
Sarcasm.
Anyway,
woo.
Take care. Yeah, I'm not sure where you're going with that. Have a good night, everybody. Take care. We'll see you later.
Bye.